Now, look, I don't want to gloat, but I am going to say I told you so. I released a video on the 16th of June telling you that Jared Bowen was staying at West Ham United. It wasn't speculation, it was information I'd received from a close source to corroborate that story. And no, it wasn't from Sean Whetstone either. And I'm glad that it's now breaking out that Bowen is staying at West Ham because he could be, at this moment in time, our biggest transfer story of the summer. Look, I think it's great news. I think it's great news because it's going to calm the nerves a little bit. It's going to sort of set everyone's minds a little bit at peace, at rest, knowing that we don't have to go out looking for a replacement for Jared Bowen. So I think it's good, and I think it sets the sort of precedence for how this transfer window may go. Because now I'm going to speculate a little further. Because look, it's been 5 weeks since the transfer window has opened. 5 in total. It opened on the 1st of June, and then it closed down for something like 7 days or something because of the World Cup. But it was opened again, and it's been open in total for 5 weeks. And apart from Keebler Madrid officially joining the senior squad on a permanent basis, West Ham haven't made any other signings. Meanwhile, we've had players leave because their contract's ending, like Fabianski, etc. And of course, we sold Matthias Fernandes for a cool £85 million. But that's been it. There's been no flood of new arrivals, no obvious squad rebuild, and understandably, supporters starting to ask the obvious question. When is this transfer window actually going to begin? So, before I dive into it, if you're new to this channel, or if you've watched the West Ham Voice before, QR code has appeared in that top corner. If you enjoy the content, click on that code, takes you to the subscription page. Subscription is free of charge, so why not become a subscriber? Now, every day brings another rumour, another player being linked, another name supposedly close to signing, yet nothing is materialising. But perhaps we're looking at this in completely the wrong way. Perhaps, whilst everyone is waiting for new signings, West Ham have quietly welcomed back 7 players who were out on loan last season, and they've added another 2 academy players to the senior squad. If you look at the senior squad on the official West Ham website, you'll see 9 faces, all of them familiar, but 4 have come back on loan, senior players. 3 academy players have come back on loan, and 2 academy players have been elevated from the under-21s to the senior squad. That's 9 players suddenly available to Nuno. So here's the question. What if the foundations of next season's championship squad are already here? Not because every one of these players is likely to stay. So almost certainly, some will still leave, but because some of them might suddenly become very useful footballers in the championship in the way that they weren't in the Premier League last season. So I'm going to go through each of them briefly and ask 2 questions for each player. Firstly, are they actually good enough for the championship? And secondly, is there a realistic chance that they'd be West Ham players when the transfer window closes? So let's start off with the player I only spoke about the other day. And that player is Edson Alvarez. Now, I talked about him the other day. He's just, his World Cup is over. And 12 months ago, most supporters would have expected Alvarez to leave regardless of what league we were staying in. He wasn't getting on with Graham Potter. Graham Potter sent him out on loan to Fenerbahce, where he kind of started okay, but then injury took hold and he missed most of the season. And now he's back. He's finished the World Cup and we're expecting him back soon. Now, the narrative has been that Alvarez doesn't want to stay at West Ham. I don't know if he or his agent has publicly said that, but most of the reports are suggesting that that's the case. Now, we've heard that FC Cologne are interested in the player, but we've also since heard that FC Cologne might be interested in him, but they can't afford his wages. They want him on loan, but they can't afford to buy him. Now, look, I was asked the other day on a comment from another video, look, why are we trying to loan these players out? Just sell them. Well, in order to sell a player, you need a club to buy the player, because it's all very well wanting to sell. If you haven't got anyone to sell to, that becomes a bit of a difficulty. Look, if he stays at West Ham, from a footballing perspective, you could argue that he'd actually do all right in the Championship. He's physically demanding. He's a very physical player. His reading of the game can sometimes be good. I know he picks up too many yellow cards, but nonetheless, his experience could arguably make him one of the Championship's best defensive midfielders. So the question really isn't about ability. I don't think that's ever been really sort of contested. It's about whether the player himself wants to stay or not. Because I do feel, look, I think he'll do well in the Championship, but I do feel if a suitable offer arrives, then he will probably leave. But if it doesn't, then West Ham could possess one of the better central midfielders in the Championship. Now, the next up is a player we haven't seen for quite a long while, and that's Maxwell Cornet. Now, look, Cornet's Premier League spell at West Ham just didn't get off. After scoring that goal that should have been allowed against Chelsea, we hardly saw any more of him. Injuries kept kept putting him out, and then we ended up loaning him out to Genoa for 2 seasons in a row to try and revive his career. But again, injuries meant that he didn't have a consistent run of games. But there are rumours suggesting that we could terminate his contract by mutual consent. Now, again, that's a rumour. I don't know how definite that is, but I get it. Look, it would make sense financially if we sort of pay him off and pay him off less than he's in his final year of his contract, by the way. And if we pay him off less than what he's going to get for a whole season, then yeah, financially it makes sense and it frees up money and the wage bill. And of course, it frees up a place in the squad itself. But could Cornet succeed in the Championship? Well, again, possible. Of course, he's still got decent pace, but of course, the problem is consistency. I think Championship defenders won't relish, coming up against a player of his sort of direct skill. But it's the problem about his injuries, and can West Ham rely on him staying available for 46 games plus, cup games as well? And history would suggest no. I think there's still a good chance that he will go before the transfer window shuts, whether to go out on loan again or to pay off his contract and for him to leave. But if he stayed, again, an experienced player that could possibly, benefit West Ham. The next one, a little bit fascinating, and probably the answer is no, he won't stay before we even get going. Look, 2 years ago, under Graham Potter, he was the most dependable player in midfield, or one of our most dependable players. And then everything changed. Potter left, Nuno came in, and immediately he was out of favour. Loaned away to relegated Burnley, and now questions continue whether Nuno would see him as part of our future. Look, again, when it comes to the Championship, you're not going to argue that Ward-Prowse won't be decent. His set delivery pieces alone could be worth several goals in the Championship. And once upon a time, he was captain of Southampton. So he's got leadership skills, he's professional, he's got experience. That will all become quite valuable in a promotion campaign. The issue again isn't about quality. This time it's about suitability. Does Nuno want a player who's actually quite slow in possession-based midfielder, or would he want someone more dynamic? Look, if Nuno doesn't see him fitting into the system, he'll probably leave, despite being more than capable of starring in the Championship. And then the next player who's back from loan is, of course, the big German, Nicolas Fullkrug. Probably the player supporters might still think could give us something. We've been saying it for 2 seasons now. We know he's a decent goal scorer. He can do it for West Ham, but again, injuries have taken their toll, etc. He was sent out on loan to AC Milan. His return was 1 goal. Now, look, rumours consistently link him to clubs, mainly in Germany, and the suggestion remains that West Ham would consider selling him only if a decent bid comes in. Now, we're not talking 15, 20 million or anything like that. Even something like 7 or 8 million could see him go. Now, unfortunately, at this moment in time, no offers are in. I think they may happen, but at this moment in time, they're not. Now, we're, bemoaning the fact that we couldn't keep hold of Callum Wilson and saying that his experience could have actually smashed it in the championship. I'm going to ask the same question of Fullkrug. Could he score goals in the championship? They weren't able to do it in the top Italian league, wasn't able to do it in the Premier League, but could he score goals in the championship? And the answer is quite possibly, yeah. But the problem again, a bit like Cornet is his fitness. If he stays fit, then quite possibly he could be very, very useful to West Ham United in the championship. But would you put your reliance on a player that is more often than not going to become injured? And then what do you do? Look, he'd be behind Tati. He may even be behind Pablo. I don't know if Pablo and Tati stays. Now, I don't think he himself would relish the fact that he would actually be a second or third choice player, striker in the championship. I don't know. I don't think he'd really appreciate that, to be honest with you. Right, let's move on to the 3 academy players that were out on loan last season. And the first is central defender Caelan Casey. Now, look, here's the interesting thing with Casey. Look, he went out on loan to Swansea. He didn't get quite as enough game time as we were hoping for, which is a shame, because when you send out your academy players, that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping that they get vast experience in playing regular football week in, week out. Now, the interesting thing with Casey is if we'd have stayed in the Premier League, he would probably be sent out on loan again to a championship team. So why not just keep him in the squad and see how he develops whilst he's playing with senior players in West Ham rather than send him out on loan? Because look, it's a long season, injuries happen, suspensions happen, and all that sort of stuff. And maybe, quite maybe, Casey could benefit from that. I don't know. It's an interesting one. I can't tell you whether we would keep him or not, to be quite honest with you. I think the transfer window will determine. Look, if we get Disasi back, for example, and we keep hold of our other central defenders, maybe not Todibo, but Dinos certainly, then it'll be less likely for Casey to stay. We've got, of course, Ezra Myers, who I think was superb last season, who would be, I think, maybe ahead of Casey. Would you want 2 young central defenders from the academy in the squad? Or would you rather sort of have a more experienced backup? We don't know if Disasi's coming back. Todibo looks like he will be going. So at the moment, it's only Dinos. And it would be a tall order for Myers and Casey to be the sort of first team choices. So I think we'll see what happens. If Disasi comes or if another experienced central defender comes, then quite possibly Casey might go out on loan again. And the same thing applies to the next player, George Earthy. Now, high hopes for Earthy. I think a lot of West Ham fans just really wish him to come good. Technical ability cannot be questioned. But in the championship, he was out on loan to Bristol City 2 seasons ago. He was voted young player of the season then. And then he went out on loan and he did really, really well. Then he went out on loan to the same team last season and it didn't quite go so well. Didn't get as much game time as he was hoping for. And it was one of those things where you kind of think, a bit like Casey, you send them out on loan, you want them to get more and more experience. But when it doesn't happen, it's frustrating for the player and it's frustrating for West Ham because he's an unknown entity at this moment in time. We don't know if he's the sort of player that would actually do well under a Nuno system. Now, I think, again, a bit like Casey, I think we're going to see what happens. We've got even though Matthias Fernandes is gone, we've still got quite a few senior players in central midfield. Would Earthy be able to get into this squad on a regular basis? I'm not too sure is the honest answer. Next up is a player who actually did have a good time out on loan, and that was Callum Marshall. He went out on loan to German League Division 2 team Bochum. He scored goals. He created goals. He actually, of the academy players that went out on loan last season, I think he got enormous experience from it. Now, would I trust him to be first team choice? for West Ham in the Championship? Not necessarily, but would I keep him as maybe second or third choice striker? Yes, I think I would, because Championship football could be his level. It could be where, again, if we'd have stayed in the Premier League, it's quite possible he would have been loaned out to a Championship team. So, yet again, I say the same question as Casey and Earthy. But I think in terms of Marshall's setup, I think he stands more of a chance of being a regular sort of backup player in the squad over Earthy and maybe over Casey as well. But yeah, I think he's one player that could definitely benefit. Now, two players that I said that have been elevated from the academy to the senior squad are, first off, talk about Lewis Orford. Now, another player, a bit like Earthy in a way, technically very good, but he hasn't sort of generated enough interest. I mean, he went out on loan last season. I think it was Stevenage, but that worked out pretty badly. He hardly got any game time at all. So again, another player that, I think he's a very good player. I think every coach that manages him is impressed by his attitude, his intelligence, his composure, good decision making. He did really, really well in the under-21s league last season. Could the Championship be the step up that he deserves now? I think there's a chance more over Earthy than Orford. Quite possibly. I think Orford could leapfrog. But we've got other players, Preston Fearon as a prime example, who is also a very good central midfielder. But Orford, I don't know, maybe Nuno might take a chance on him to see how he develops. And if it doesn't kind of work out, then, halfway through the season, he could be sent out on loan. And then the final player is La Madrid, who I've mentioned at the start of the show. He's now permanent signing for West Ham. And maybe Nuno has seen enough of him already to consider that he could play a major role in the Championship. Look, I'm not expecting him to play 30 games in the season, but as a backup, I think that's quite possible. I think he showed that one game he played in the Cup. I think he showed glimpses of what he's capable of. So it's quite possible that La Madrid himself could become a regular feature as a backup, as a substitute in this senior squad. So, what does this all tell us about the squad and the lack of signings? Well, not every player returning looks to be surplus. Not every player returning might need to be replaced. Not every player coming that was struggling in the Premier League or just didn't make it to the Premier League last season, it doesn't mean that they would struggle in the Championship. We've got 9 players there that could offer something. Not all are going to stay, but in the Championship, it could offer them an opportunity. It's a different place, different style, different physical demands. Players that were written off in the Premier League could actually do really well in the Championship. And the real challenge for Nuno isn't simply about signing new players. It's correctly identifying which of these returning players deserve a second chance. Look, I've said several times before that the squad going into the Championship is going to require a mix of seasoned, established pros as well as young blood to give ourselves the right balance, if not only fighting for promotion, but to be one of the favourites to go up automatically at first time of asking. If we're going to keep Alvarez, Ward-Prowse, Fullkrug, Cornet, there's your experience. If you add in Casey, Earthy, Marshall, Orford and La Madrid, there's your youth. A season in the Championship for these players playing for West Ham rather than going out on loan could be the ideal platform, especially for the academy players, to progress. And suddenly, this squad doesn't require 10 new signings. Perhaps it may only need 2 or 3. Quality rather than quantity, tweaking rather than wholesale change. Now, that changes the whole transfer strategy. Of course, I think there will still be departures. I've already said, certainly about the 4 senior players I've mentioned. It could be that we'll end up with none of them staying. That's very possible. But maybe the squad rebuild might not be just as dramatic as many supporters believe it is at this moment in time. Perhaps the first wave of new signings aren't new at all. They're simply players returning to a club that now finds itself in a different league, where the qualities maybe finally will match their ability. When you think about it, their ability to play in the Championship might suit them far more. That's weird, isn't it? But it may well do. And because before we need to start spending millions on replacements, Nuno may want to find answers to the question of which of these 9 players have already earned their right to be part of the championship squad next season. And if the answer is if 4 or 5 of them prove to be decent, then suddenly West Ham's summer transfer window looks a lot less intense than it currently feels. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the channel. If you like what you've heard, become a subscriber by clicking on that. Subscription is free of charge. Where did I go then? If you've enjoyed this show, please hit the like button, the bell notification, and hit the hype button, which promotes this video to other viewers on YouTube. Thank you for watching and listening, and I'll see you again.